So Don, what is solar?
Solar is the School of Landscape Architecture. We're here within Lincoln University. We're also within the Faculty of Environment, Society and Design. And within our program we've got the Bachelor of Landscape Architecture and we've also got the Master of Landscape Architecture as well.
And landscape architecture is more than just pretty cottage gardens, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Landscape architecture is not just a garden. That's obviously something that is part of our sort of foray of things, but that's very much the start of the spectrum. When we're thinking about landscape architecture, we sort of go right from the small scale, through from seat design, furniture design, through to courtyard design, gardens, right through to things like subdivisions, through to master planning as well. So for instance, Pegasus was designed by landscape architects, so that's a whole new community in itself. So we can go right from the very small scale to the large scale. Landscape architecture also sort of thinks about things in a holistic sense. So we have a more sort of overall arching kind of concept of things. So we think about right through from the small scale to the large scale and everything that we do as well.
And conservation?
Yeah, so conservation is obviously a big part of what's happening here in New Zealand. We've had students here also sort of thinking about conservation a lot in some of their projects. For instance, the year before last, we had some third year students working on a project for a potential new national park in Mackenzie country, the grasslands. And basically one of the things we were taking them through there was challenging the concept of what a national park is in the 21st century. You know, is it just a place that you go to visit? Is it a place that you actually are totally immersed in a different type of experience? Is it something that's just in one location? Is it spread out? And how do they actually interact with it? Is there a digital aspect to it now? And so we got them asking through some of those big questions as well.
And conservation agriculture?
Yeah, so this is a new concept which is starting to sweep the world. This is basically looking at farming in a more sustainable way. So looking at actually working with the land, working with what you've actually got currently there on the farm. So for instance, up in Orongo Station in Young Nick's Head, an American firm has brought in this concept and they've actually worked with the land. So this Nelson Bird Waltz firm, they've got 6,000 hectares currently set around the world in conservation agriculture, and they've worked with a client up in the North Island and working with the land, the cultural processes as well, because it's got a lot of Māori history as well there, and they've also created it as a financially viable farm. So it's more than just here's some pretty green that we're going to kind of protect and just leave it off to the side, but actually working with the landscape, working with the natural vegetation in a financially viable way. So they've also been looking at, for instance, their branding and identity. So it's a beef and lamb farm, so it's actually got now a very big international reputation simply because of how viable it is to actually mix conservation and agriculture at the same time.
And your fourth years are actually working on projects of their own as well?
Yeah, at the moment they're working on building up a design study. So that goes through the groundwork for their second semester work. And they're also working on 3 different sites currently for looking at catalytic change. So the 3 sites that they're looking at, one is a cricket club in Auckland, another one is an urban living residential development in central city Christchurch, and also a green site in Shanghai in the Huangpu River. And the purpose or the brief for that particular project is that they have to look at a site and they've got to think of it as something that would create a catalytic change. So people would look to the site and use it as, say, like an exemplar or something that would inspire change throughout people's attitudes or even just bigger to scale design as well throughout the world. So it's a big task for them in that sort of project. Yeah, and then the second half of the year, that's when they work on their major design. So as fourth year students, just before sort of heading towards the last stretch, they work on a site of their choosing, and they work on that from a regional scale, which is sort of around 1 to 10, 1 to 20,000, right down to 1 to 100, and building construction details at 1 to 10, 1 to 20.
And the practical application of those projects?
Yeah, so the fourth years when they finish, they go onto some amazing sites and places around the world. So we have students who not only work here in New Zealand, but also, say for instance, go to Australia, Dubai, England, America as well. And they can go on to work on some quite impressive projects too. For instance, the lead designer for the blueprint plan here in Christchurch was a landscape architect. So he was in charge of coordinating some of those things, and as a landscape architect, we have this overall kind of thinking, like I was saying before, this holistic thinking. We can team a whole lot of people together and actually come up with a really good result.
What's the main thing you'd actually like people to take away about landscape architecture?
I think probably the main thing would be that it's more than just pansies and petunias at, say, for instance, at your garden gate or something, you know, if I had $1 every time someone say to me, oh, you're a landscape architect, oh, you can come and do our garden. It's not landscaping, for instance. Landscape architecture obviously looks at the design of things and the arrangement of our landscape, how we can blend our natural processes and actually harmoniously balance them with our cultural processes as well.